The world of Elarion. Elarion was a city of order, where the rhythm of daily life was dictated by the unyielding hands of tradition and the watchful eyes of the Council of Elders. Nestled within a vast and fertile valley, the city stretched along the banks of the river Velan, its stone buildings rising in neat, uniform rows that reflected the rigid structure of its people. The streets were wide and meticulously paved, designed for efficiency and control, ensuring that every citizen moved with purpose and without deviation from the established path. At the heart of Elarion stood the Grand Hall, a towering edifice of polished marble and gold, where the Council of Elders convened to uphold the Doctrine of Balance, a principle that governed every aspect of life, from trade and governance to personal conduct. The society of Elarion was built upon a foundation of harmony, a belief that only through strict adherence to tradition and collective responsibility could true prosperity be achieved. Every citizen had a role, from the artisans who crafted the city's intricate tapestries to the scholars who preserved the wisdom of the past. There was no place for excess, no room for deviation. The doctrine of balance dictated that all must contribute equally to the whole, and those who sought individuality or questioned the order of things were met with quiet disapproval, if not outright condemnation. To deviate from the prescribed path was to invite disorder, and disorder was the greatest enemy of Elarion. The political structure of the city was a delicate balance of power, with the Council of Elders acting as both rulers and spiritual guides, composed of the most respected scholars, merchants, and artisans. The council ensured that the city remained in a state of equilibrium. Their decisions were made with the belief that stability was the key to Elarion's survival, and any change, no matter how small, was met with scrutiny. The people of Elarion were taught from a young age that the well-being of the city was more important than the desires of the individual. To question the council was to question the very fabric of society. Culturally, Elarion was a city of tradition, where the past was revered and the future was shaped by the wisdom of those who came before. Art, music, and literature were all carefully curated to reflect the values of the Doctrine of Balance. There was no room for rebellion, no space for the unknown. The people of Elarion lived in harmony, their lives dictated by the unspoken rule that the whole was greater than the sum of its parts. And yet, beneath the surface of this carefully maintained order, there was a quiet unease, a whisper of something unspoken that lingered in the minds of those who dared to wonder if there was more to life than the rigid structure of Elarion. The protagonist's burden. Elyria was born into the world of Elarion, the daughter of a respected artisan who wove intricate tapestries that adorned the halls of the Grand Hall. From a young age she had been taught that her place in society was to serve the greater whole, to contribute to the balance that sustained the city. Her days were filled with the rhythmic clatter of looms and the scent of dyed wool, her hands guided by the expectations of her family and the traditions of her people. Yet, even as she followed the prescribed path, a quiet discontent stirred within her. She had always been curious, a trait that had been met with mild disapproval by her elders. While others accepted the order of Elarion without question, Elyria found herself wondering about the world beyond the city's walls. What lay beyond the river Velan? What lay beyond the carefully maintained streets and the watchful eyes of the council? She had heard stories from travelers who spoke of lands untouched by the Doctrine of Balance, where individuals were free to shape their own destinies. These tales had been dismissed as the ramblings of those who had strayed from the path, but they had planted a seed of doubt in Elyria's mind. Despite the expectations placed upon her, she could not ignore the growing sense that something was missing. The rigid structure of Elarion, while efficient, felt suffocating. The people moved with purpose. But was that purpose truly their own? She had seen the way the council dictated the course of lives, the way those who questioned the order of things were quietly cast aside. It was not that she wished to break the rules, but she longed for something more, a life that was not dictated by the will of others. Elyria was not alone in her quiet unrest. There were others who, like her, felt the weight of the doctrine pressing upon them, who wondered if the harmony of Elarion was not as perfect as it seemed. But unlike them, she was the only one who dared to dream of something different. And as the years passed, that dream grew stronger, until the day she would take the first step toward a life that was not bound by the expectations of the city, the weight of conformity. In Elarion, the Doctrine of Balance was more than a philosophy. It was a way of life, an unyielding force that shaped every aspect of existence. From the moment a child took their first steps, they were taught that individuality was a threat to the harmony of the city. The Council of Elders, revered as the guardians of this balance, ensured that every citizen played their part in the grand design of Elarion. There was no room for deviation, no space for personal ambition beyond the collective good. To question the order of things was to question the very foundation of society. The council's authority was absolute, and their influence extended into every corner of the city. They dictated the laws that governed trade, the rules that determined the distribution of resources, and the moral code that dictated acceptable behavior. The people of Elarion were expected to live in accordance with these laws, for any deviation was seen as a disruption to the delicate equilibrium that had sustained the city for generations. Those who sought to challenge the council's authority, no matter how subtly, were met with swift and unrelenting consequences. There was no need for open rebellion in Elarion. The city thrived on quiet compliance. The people moved through their daily lives with a sense of duty, their actions dictated by the expectations of their roles. Artisans wove tapestries that reflected the city's values, scholars preserved the wisdom of the past, and merchants ensured that the economy remained in a state of perfect balance. Every citizen was a piece of the grand design, and to act outside of their prescribed function was to invite disorder. Yet, even within this rigid structure, there were those who felt the weight of the doctrine pressing upon them. The younger generation, in particular, found themselves caught between the expectations of their elders and the quiet yearning for something more. They had been taught that the harmony of Elarion was the highest ideal, but they could not help but wonder if that harmony came at the cost of their own desires. They saw the way the council dictated the course of their lives, the way the doctrine of balance was used to suppress any form of individual expression. The fear of dissent was not merely a theoretical concern. It was an ever-present reality. The people of Elarion had long been taught that the greatest threat to their society was not war or famine, but the idea that an individual might choose a path that did not align with the will of the whole. Those who had once questioned the council had been cast out, their names erased from the records of the city. They had been told that their exile was a necessary measure, that the preservation of harmony required the removal of those who would disrupt the balance. Despite the council's efforts to maintain control, the pressure of conformity was not without its consequences. The people of Elarion lived in a state of constant vigilance, their lives shaped by the unspoken rule that the whole must always come before the individual. There was no room for personal ambition, no space for the pursuit of dreams beyond the prescribed path. To live in Elarion was to accept the doctrine of balance, to embrace the idea that one's worth was measured not by individuality, but by one's contribution to the collective good. And yet, beneath the surface of this carefully maintained order, the question remained: was this harmony truly the highest form of existence, or was it merely a mask for the suppression of the human spirit? A step beyond the city. Elyria's first act of defiance was not loud, nor was it dramatic. It was a quiet decision, one that she made in the solitude of her chamber, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows across the walls. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, her hands trembling as she packed a small satchel with provisions, wands, a map of the surrounding lands, and a single, unmarked journal. The journal was to be her own, not one dictated by the council or the doctrine of balance. It would be a record of her thoughts, her discoveries, and perhaps her rebellion. The decision to leave Elarion was not made lightly. She knew that to step beyond the city's walls was to risk everything, her family, her future, and the safety of her life. The council had made it clear that those who strayed from the path of the doctrine would not be welcomed back. Yet the weight of her discontent had grown too heavy to bear. The rigid structure of Elarion, the unyielding expectations of the council, the way her life had been shaped by forces beyond her control, it all felt like a cage, and she had grown tired of being a prisoner within it. At first, she moved through the city with the same quiet efficiency as any other citizen, her steps measured, her face impassive. She passed through the grand hall, where the council of elders debated the future of the city, their voices echoing through the marble corridors. She did not look up, did not speak, but she listened. She saw the way the people moved with purpose, their lives dictated by the will of the whole, and she felt the weight of her own unspoken desire pressing against the walls of her chest. Then, one night, she slipped through the city's outer gates, her heart pounding in her chest as the familiar sounds of Elarion faded behind her. The world beyond the city was vast and unknown, and as she walked into the darkness, she felt both the fear of the unknown and the exhilaration of possibility. The journey ahead would be fraught with uncertainty, but for the first time in her life she was walking a path of her own choosing. The first night was spent beneath the open sky, the stars above her like silent witnesses to her decision. She had not yet reached the lands beyond the city, but she was no longer bound by its rules. The weight of the doctrine of balance no longer pressed upon her, and though she did not yet know where her journey would lead, she knew that she had taken the first step toward something greater than herself. The shifting tides of thought. As Elyria journeyed beyond the borders of Elarion, the world around her began to change in ways she had never imagined. The rigid structure of the city, with its meticulously ordered streets and unyielding rules, had given way to a landscape that was both wild and free. The land was not shaped by the hands of the council, nor was it dictated by the doctrine of balance. Here the trees grew in untamed clusters, the rivers carved their own paths through the earth, and the people moved with a fluidity that was foreign to her. It was a world that did not demand conformity, that did not measure worth by one's contribution to the whole. She encountered a group of nomadic people who called themselves the Vale, a name they claimed came from the way they moved through the land like mist, unseen and unbound by the laws of the cities. They welcomed her with cautious curiosity, their eyes filled with the quiet wisdom of those who had long lived outside the reach of the council. They did not speak of the doctrine of balance, nor did they seek to impose their own order upon her. Instead, they listened as she spoke of the world she had left behind, of the city that had shaped her life, and of the questions that had long haunted her. In their presence, Elyria felt a shift within herself. For the first time, she was not expected to conform, not forced to follow a path that had been chosen for her. The people of the Vale did not dictate the course of one another's lives, nor did they measure success by the contribution of the individual to the whole. Instead, they lived in a way that allowed for change, for growth, for the pursuit of knowledge that was not dictated by the will of others. Their way of life was not perfect, but it was not bound by the same rigid constraints that had defined Elarion. As she spent more time among them, she began to see the world in a different light. The doctrine of balance, which had once seemed like the foundation of civilization, now felt like a prison. It was not that the people of Elarion had been wrong to seek harmony, but the way they had enforced it had come at the cost of individuality, of the right to choose one's own path. The council had taught her that the whole must always come before the individual, but the people of the Vale had shown her that the individual was not a threat to the whole, but a vital part of it. Her thoughts turned to the people of Elarion, to the lives that had been shaped by the unyielding will of the council. Had they truly been living in harmony, or had they been living in a state of forced compliance? Had the doctrine of balance been a path to stability, or had it been a way to suppress the natural diversity of human thought and experience? She had been raised to believe that the city was the pinnacle of civilization, that the people of Elarion had achieved the highest form of order. But now, as she listened to the stories of the Vale, she began to wonder if that order had come at the cost of something greater. And yet, the thought of returning to Elarion filled her with unease. Could she go back, knowing what she now knew? Could she continue to live within the rigid structure of the city, to follow the path that had been laid out for her, knowing that it was not her own? The weight of her decision pressed upon her, and for the first time she felt the true depth of what it meant to be an individual in a society that sought to suppress such thoughts. She had taken the first step beyond the city, but the journey ahead was far from simple. The world outside Elarion was not without its own rules, its own dangers. And yet, for the first time in her life, she was no longer bound by the expectations of others. She was free to choose her own path, to shape her own future. And as she stood beneath the open sky, the stars above her like silent witnesses to her transformation, she knew that she would never again be the same. The confrontation. Elyria returned to Elarion under the cover of darkness, her heart pounding as she stepped through the city's gates. The familiar streets stretched before her, the same meticulously paved paths that had once felt like chains. The grand hall loomed above, its golden spires reflecting the moonlight in a way that made it seem almost otherworldly. Yet, as she moved through the city, she felt the weight of her journey pressing upon her. The people of Elarion had always followed the path laid out for them, and now she would challenge that path. She made her way to the grand hall, her steps measured but resolute. The council of elders would be gathered there, as they were every night, debating the future of the city. She had no illusions about the consequences of what she was about to do. To speak before the council was to invite scrutiny, to risk exile, perhaps even death. But she had come too far to turn back now. The doors of the grand hall opened before her, and the chamber beyond was filled with the council's members, their faces illuminated by the flickering torchlight. They turned as she entered, their expressions unreadable. She did not speak immediately. Instead, she took a step forward, her voice steady as she addressed them. "Honored elders," she began, "I come before you not as a rebel, but as one who has seen the truth of our world. I have walked beyond the borders of Elarion, and I have seen a way of life that does not demand the sacrifice of the individual. I have seen people who live not by the will of the council, but by their own choices. I have seen a society that does not measure worth by contribution to the whole, but by the freedom of the individual." A murmur rippled through the chamber, but the council remained silent. Elyria pressed on, her voice rising with conviction. "The doctrine of balance has long been the foundation of our city, but I ask you, has it truly brought us harmony, or has it only given us the illusion of it? We have been taught that the whole must always come before the individual, but is that not a form of control? Are we not meant to live as we choose, to shape our own destinies, rather than be bound by the will of others?" The council's leader, an elder named Thalos, rose from his seat. His voice was calm but firm. "You speak of freedom, Elyria, but freedom is not the absence of rules. It is the ability to live in accordance with the greater good. The doctrine of balance has sustained Elarion for generations. To question it is to question the very foundation of our society." Elyria met his gaze without flinching. "And what of those who have been cast out for questioning it? What of those who have been silenced for daring to think for themselves? You have taught us that the whole must come before the individual, but what if the whole is not as perfect as we have been led to believe?" A hush fell over the chamber. The council members exchanged glances, some of them uncertain, others still resolute. Elyria could feel the weight of their judgment pressing upon her, but she did not falter. She had come too far to be silenced now. "You have seen the world beyond Elarion," she continued, her voice unwavering. "You have seen that there is more to life than the rigid structure of our city. You have seen that individuals are not a threat to the whole, but a part of it. And I ask you now, will you continue to enforce a system that suppresses the very thing that makes us human?" The chamber was silent. The council had heard her, and for the first time Elyria felt the full weight of what she had done. She had challenged the foundation of Elarion, and the consequences of that challenge had only just begun. The ripple of defiance. The Council of Elders did not act immediately. Illyria's words had struck a chord, not only among the gathered members, but within the very fabric of Elarion itself. The people of the city, who had long accepted the doctrine of balance without question, now found themselves caught in the wake of a single act of defiance. The council's silence was a signal, a warning that the balance they had so carefully maintained was beginning to shift. In the days that followed, Elyria was confined to her quarters, her presence in the city now a subject of quiet discussion. The council did not exile her, but neither did they grant her any form of reprieve. She was neither a criminal nor a traitor, but a disruption to the order they had spent generations preserving. Her words had not gone unnoticed, and the people of Elarion, though fearful, could not ignore the questions she had raised. Despite her confinement, Elyria's influence did not wane. The people who had once followed the path dictated by the council now found themselves questioning the nature of that path. Whispers spread through the city, carried by those who had once been content to live within the rigid structure of Elarion. Some spoke of the world beyond the city, of the lives that had been shaped by freedom rather than control. Others questioned whether the doctrine of balance had truly been the foundation of their prosperity, or merely a means of suppressing the individual will. The council, sensing the growing unrest, moved swiftly. They issued decrees that reaffirmed the importance of the doctrine, warning that any further deviation from the prescribed path would be met with swift and unrelenting consequences. Yet, for all their efforts, they could not silence the thoughts that had been planted in the minds of the people. The council had ruled for generations, but Elyria had shown that even the most rigid structures could be shaken. Beyond the city, the people of the Vale watched with quiet interest. They had long known that the world beyond Elarion was not as perfect as the council claimed, but they had also seen the way the people of the city lived, bound by a system that had long suppressed the individual. Elyria's defiance had not only challenged the council, it had shown the world that there was more than one way to live. In the months that followed, the influence of Elyria's actions spread far beyond the city. Travelers who had once been content to remain within the borders of Elarion now ventured into the unknown, drawn by the possibility of a different way of life. Some returned with stories of the people of the Vale, of the way they lived without the rigid constraints of the doctrine. Others came back with a different understanding of the world, carrying with them the seeds of change that had been sown in the quiet defiance of one woman. The Council of Elders, for all their power, could not ignore the growing tide of change. The balance they had so carefully maintained was no longer as absolute as it had once been. The people of Elarion were no longer content to follow the path laid out for them, and though Elyria had been silenced, her voice had not been lost. The legacy of Defiance. In the years that followed Elyria's return, the people of Elarion found themselves standing at a crossroads. The Council of Elders, once unchallenged in their authority, now faced a society that had begun to question the very foundation of their rule. The Doctrine of Balance, which had once been the unshakable pillar of Elarion's order, was no longer as absolute as it had once been. The people, once content to follow the prescribed path, now moved with a quiet uncertainty, their thoughts no longer bound by the rigid expectations of the past. Though Elyria had been confined and her voice had been silenced, her influence had not been erased. The questions she had raised had taken root in the hearts of the people, and though the council had done their best to suppress the change, they could not undo the transformation that had already begun. The city of Elarion, once a place of unyielding conformity, now found itself at the threshold of something new. The balance that had once been the foundation of its society was no longer a force of control, but a question that demanded an answer. The people of Elarion, who had once lived in the shadow of the council's will, now found themselves free to think, to choose, to shape their own lives in ways that had long been forbidden. Some clung to the old ways, fearing that the loss of structure would bring chaos. Others embraced the change, seeing in it the possibility of a future that was not dictated by the will of others. The city, once a place of rigid order, now became a place of possibility, where the individual was no longer a threat to the whole, but a vital part of it. Elyria's name was spoken in hushed tones, not as a warning, but as a reminder of the power of a single voice to challenge the will of many. Though she had not lived to see the full transformation of Elarion, her legacy endured. The people who had once been bound by the doctrine of balance now walked a path of their own choosing, their lives shaped not by the will of the council, but by their own desires and dreams. And so, the story of Elarion became a tale of transformation, of the quiet power of the individual to challenge the forces of conformity. The world beyond the city, once a place of uncertainty, now became a symbol of possibility. And in the end, the balance that had once been the foundation of Elarion was no longer a force of control, but a reflection of the choices that the people had made for themselves. The story of Elyria and Elarion is a testament to the enduring power of the individual in the face of a society that seeks to suppress it. Throughout history, civilizations have often been built upon the idea that the collective is more important than the individual, that harmony can only be achieved through strict adherence to a singular path. Yet, as Elyria's journey shows, true harmony cannot be imposed. It must be chosen freely through the voices of those who dare to question the status quo. In Elarion, the doctrine of balance had long been upheld as the foundation of society, a system that ensured order and stability at the cost of personal freedom. The people had been taught that the whole must always come before the individual, that to act outside of the prescribed path was to invite chaos. But Elyria's defiance proved that such a belief was not only flawed, but ultimately unsustainable. No society, no matter how rigidly structured, can remain unchallenged forever. The individual, though often the smallest force in the grand scheme of things, is the spark that ignites change. It is the quiet voice that, when heard, can reshape the course of history. Elyria's journey was not without cost. She had been cast out of the city, her name spoken in hushed tones by those who feared the consequences of her actions. Yet her influence had not been erased. She had shown the people of Elarion that there was a different way to live, that the rigid structure of the council was not the only path to stability. Her story became a symbol of the power of the individual, of the courage it takes to stand against a society that seeks to silence dissent. In the end, it was not the Council of Elders who shaped the future of Elarion, but the people who had been inspired by Elyria's defiance. The balance that had once been the foundation of the city was no longer a force of control, but a reflection of the choices made by those who had once been bound by it. The people of Elarion had learned that the individual was not a threat to the whole, but a vital part of it. And in that realization, the city found a new kind of harmony, one that was not dictated by the will of the few, but by the voices of many. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories. Hit the notification bell to be notified of new stories when they become available. Feel free to leave a comment and tell me if you enjoyed the story and want to hear more like it.